Fantastic. Okay. Well, welcome anyway to this talk on depression, a subject that I'm really interested in and very, very passionate. Thanks, Bill, for inviting me along today to talk to your group. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Just a little bit about me. My name's Liz George, and I'm the founder of the Wellbeing Centre. And I've got 25 years plus experience of working with problems like depression. My background has been working in the NHS in primary care psychological therapies, mental health teams, and also within the corporate sector, helping stressed out business professionals and sales professionals to escape stress, anxiety, and common mental health problems like depression. So what I've done is I've put together an agenda. So it's going to kind of run for about 30 minutes, and I've left plenty of time towards the end, Bill, and everyone else to actually ask any questions about what I've spoken about today. It is non-prescriptive, so if you need to stop me on the way through and check out something with me or talk about anything that I'm touching upon, please feel free to do that.
Will do.
Okay. I can't see you, so I think it is to do with my settings. So
it'll be your Zoom.
That's a shame, isn't it?
It's all right.
But listen, you can see me, can't you?
Yeah, we can see you and we can see your presentation. So
fantastic. Okay, so in terms of what you want to get out of today, I'm going to run through the agenda of everything I'm going to cover that I think is important. But is there anything specifically that you would like me to cover and that you want to get out of today?
I think for me, it's kind of, I suppose, signs, symptoms, identifying when depression might be coming about, and then some tools, to self-help tools, things like that, really.
Fantastic. All right, that's going to be covered, that's for sure. So I think what's happening is I think what I'm going to do is do this a different way.
Okay.
Because it seems to have a will of its own. And let me get back to. Okay, here we go. So in terms of I'm going to take it back a step, because I think what's happened is it's got a will of its own and it's just running through everything. So if it's okay, I'm just going to do it this way. Does that look all right to you?
Yeah, I can still see it. You can still see the slides.
Fantastic. So what we're going to be running through is what is depression and how does it affect us? What are the causes of depression, the strategies to manage depression, when to get professional help, and what help is available, because obviously it's a real minefield to know actually what help is available out there, because there are so many different treatments. And then finally, we're going to go through a Q&A session where there'll be an opportunity to ask me any questions about everything that I've covered. But as I said, please stop me throughout. It's non-prescriptive. And if there's anything that you want to ask as we're going throughout, then please feel free to do that.
Will do.
So let's go to what is depression and how it affects us. I think the first thing to say that, it is a common mental health problem, and it's very often coexists with anxiety and also stress, because stress is almost an umbrella description. And when it goes unmanaged, Bill, and everyone else, it causes common mental health problems like depression and like anxiety. And of course, 1 in 4 will experience depression at some point in their lives. It doesn't discriminate. It can happen to any of us at any time. And I just wanted to kind of say something about that, Bill, because the reality is, I believe those statistics are underreported. And the reason I believe that is because sometimes people won't want to admit to the fact that they are feeling low or feeling actually depressed.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that it never gets talked about, and people will worry about the judgment. So I actually think that 1 in 4 is probably a lot more. And of course, in its mildest form, depression doesn't stop you leading a normal life. But of course, in its severest form, it's extremely distressing, disabling, with thoughts of death or suicide. And I will talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation, and some of the signs to look out for and what you can do about that.
Okay, cool.
Okay, if we think about the signs and symptoms, and I think this was an area that you were interested in, I think it's really important to mention that there isn't a blood test to test for depression. And, you know, unlike some other medical conditions, for example, if you were testing for diabetes, there may be a blood test. There isn't for depression. The test for depression is a questionnaire, and it's called the Patient and Health Questionnaire, or in other words, the PHQ-9. And basically, that's a set of questions, 9 questions, as you can see on the screen. And what that does, it rates each response in terms of the frequency that you would experience the symptoms, and gives an overall score. So, for example, loss of interest or pleasure in doing things is a real behavior that people experiencing depression will very often come with, you know, this loss of motivation, that loss of pleasure, can't be bothered today, can't even, you know, don't even feel like going to work. So I think in terms of the signs and symptoms of depression, these are the 9 main signs and symptoms. There are others, admittedly, but these are what we would look for when we diagnose. I hate the word diagnose, but we do need to do a screening, and this is what we look for, and people's responses to these questions and the frequency to get an overall score. So obviously, if someone is a score between 5 and 9, they're mild depression, not too much to worry about, because actually below 9 is the point in which a client would be discharged within the NHS. And this is the main screening tool. So these loss of interest or pleasure in doing things, feeling hopeless, helpless, trouble falling asleep, you know, disturbed sleep pattern if you're feeling stressed and low, feeling tired, that lacking in energy, or poor appetite, or very often people will overeat, you know, to kind of deal with these underlying bad feelings. And concentration can very often be impacted. So things like reading, watching television, and, you know, focusing and concentrating on work tasks, whether that's in business or whether that's in work. And of course, people will report a slowing down. And what that means is, You start to slow down, maybe in your bodily movements, maybe in your speech, and maybe in the things that you do. And of course, question 9 is a really important question, or a sign and a symptom of depression. Not everyone will have suicidal thoughts, but very often, depending on the severity, it can be accompanied. So it can be a sign and it can be a symptom of depression. And I just wanted to sort of pick up on suicidal thoughts, because when I work with clients who are depressed, whether that's in the NHS, because I work 2 days a week on an NHS contract, and the other 3 days my private work, and they say they're experiencing suicidal thoughts, I'm looking at what kind of thoughts. You know, typically it will be, what's the point in going on? I can't be bothered. People may not miss me if I wasn't here. And so there's a big difference between someone having those kinds of thoughts compared to whether they have a serious plan to act upon those thoughts. And that will form part of a risk assessment in terms of, you know, I would say to somebody, a client that I was working with who was experiencing these thoughts, I understand you're really low at the moment and you're having these thoughts that we've spoken about, but can you tell me, do you have any plans to act upon them? And so normally they will say no, but obviously if they said yes, there's a different protocol that I would go down to deal with that. And we kind of haven't got time to fully go into what that protocol is at the moment, but if you want more information about that within the kind of Q&A, I can certainly give that.
Okay.
But I think the other thing to say that, you know, it's a very common mental health problem, depression. And I think the statistics are underreported. And I believe that we could all at some point in our lives, if not experience some of these symptoms ourselves, then certainly family members, those we care about, our children, our loved ones, work colleagues, business acquaintances could be experiencing them. And if you do ever hear anyone, you know, saying that they don't see any point in going on, just kind of have a chat with them, check out what's going on for them, and obviously direct them to the GP. And if so, you know, if you're really keen on helping them, I would say go along to the GP with them, if that makes sense.
I suppose with people that
yeah.
we live with, sometimes some of these symptoms can kind of happen over a few years, and you might not really sort of notice them, but also, you know, it's a bit like watching your children grow up. You don't realise how tall they've got, whereas friends and family that come in every other, like, a few months, they sort of notice, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. You I think the other thing is to mention as well is obviously depression very often can be described as the mask of sorrow. So quite frequently people, especially when they're not talking about it, and we'll come on to that a little bit later in terms of talking being very important and not suffering in silence, is that very often it is a problem where people don't talk, men in particular, and I'll come on to that and perhaps some of the reasons why that is. But unfortunately, you know, you don't always see the signs. So that's what I would say. But I was just wondering, you know, when we're kind of talking about these symptoms of depression, and depression being an emotional state, on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being your least happiness, 10 being your happiness, where would you put yourself, if that's not kind of too much of a delving question, where would you put yourself on that scale, Bill?
I've been proper beaten up this month with my well-being month. Every person I've spoken to, I've kind of like opened myself up. I have been through a lot of these. I have done questionnaires like this before. You know, I have suffered with depression. I do take medication, and sometimes I think, yeah, it'd be great to come off that medication.
Yeah.
I suppose with these symptoms, I go through phases, I suppose. I haven't been diagnosed with PTSD, but I go through phases of having a lot of these symptoms and phases of not having like a lot of these symptoms. So sort of bordering, I don't know, 4, 5, 6. It goes up and down, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, very often, I mean, if you kind of think you have PTSD, there is a specific protocol that I would go through in order to assess whether you have PTSD. Very often people will say they've got PTSD, but when you do the screening for PTSD, you know, that isn't the case. So, I mean, in terms of the PTSD screening, it looks at flashbacks, it looks at nightmares, it looks at constantly being on guard, it looks at, you know, being very jumpy. So obviously, without kind of wanting to go into that in too much depth, you know, PTSD very commonly will coexist with depression. And it will very commonly coexist with anxiety. But in order to kind of correctly, I hate the term diagnose, but in order to correctly assess what the problem is that we're dealing with, it requires a kind of a full assessment, which could take up to an hour. And there is a particular screening questionnaire, the same as the PHQ-9 that we would go through. And I'm kind of happy to send you a copy of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, that question about diagnosis, isn't it? And I've always wondered whether it'd be great to get a diagnosis, but does a diagnosis help at all? Sometimes, if people are feeling all these symptoms and they have these symptoms sort of presented in front of them and gone, it's like an answer, isn't it? It could be that little bit of jigsaw puzzle that's being put in place, and that could help people, couldn't it? Seeing all
exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a really, really good point. You know, in terms of diagnosis, I don't like the term because it kind of puts labels on things. But if you can imagine the importance of correctly identifying which particular problem we are treating, because there are different treatments for each problem. So there is a different treatment for PTSD compared to the treatment for depression. There is a different treatment for obsessive compulsive OCD than they would be for hypochondriac or specific fear and phobia. So in the same way as perhaps someone screening a person for diabetes, and then they would do certain tests, and then they would say, actually, you're diabetic. They need to know that this person has got diabetes so that they can correctly give the right treatments. And it is the same with when you're treating PTSD or depression or OCD, health anxiety, or whatever particular kind of anxiety you're treating. There is a lot of screening that will be done in the first appointment, the assessment appointment, so that we are correctly working with a treatment plan that fits with the problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just to kind of say finally on that, because I think it's a really important point that you raised, that I was once working with someone who was depressed. They also had kind of anxiety, which was characterized by a catastrophic thinking style, very constantly living in a kind of fret, future-focused state with their thinking. And it was only when I then started to consider these other symptoms, and I spoke to my clinical supervisor, who said, why don't you also screen for PTSD? And it just transpired that this person, due to a previous trauma, had PTSD. But as I said, it can very commonly coexist with anxiety, generalized anxiety, perhaps other kinds of anxiety and depression.
Yeah, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because it all kind of rolls in together, and it becomes like overwhelming, all the symptoms that you're getting, but you need to break them down and then work on each part of it individually.
Definitely.
Or work on it all together.
Absolutely. And I think when we come to the treatments, things will become a little bit more clearer, because I think unless you know what help and support and the right support, it could be very easily missed. Okay. So it may mean, because people can suffer with PTSD or various problems for years and years and years, and perhaps if they haven't had the right treatment or know what is the correct treatment that you need, because it's a minefield out there. There's lots of different talk and therapies, but counselling is not the most effective, and I'm going to kind of talk into that a little bit as we go through towards the treatments and what is really important to know when you are getting treatment for depression. And I will kind of mention the other problems as well, specifically PTSD, as you mentioned that, Bill.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay, so let's have a look at what are the causes of depression. So I mean, I think the thing to say is there's no single cause, and normally more than one reason, which differs from person to person. So the important thing is that when people are presenting with these symptoms of depression, that, you know, we look at doing a proper assessment. And so from that point of view, I'll give you an example. The other day, I don't go into any identifying detail about clients current or past. So someone came into treatment, they were particularly stressed in their life, high levels of stress. As I say, stress can cause common mental health problems like depression, and of course when we filled in the PHQ-9, she was also fairly severely depressed. And so the contributory factors were, there was a lot of stress at work to do with some of the work relationships, internal politics going on, and at home there was a lot of worry about money matters, finances, and concerns around certain members of the family. And also amidst all of this, clearly this person was looking after everyone else, but not looking after themselves. Yeah. So in that situation, there wasn't a single cause, there was multiple causes, and that the treatment plan then that we designed was very specific to that particular person and what essentially we identified as the maintaining factors of her depression, which of course was a consequence of the unresolved stresses in her life. And so working together over a period of time, a number of weeks, we were able to not only de-stress her, but also get the depression into remission, and actually she made a full recovery. The result is very tangible because, you know, in order to monitor the symptom improvement and recovery from depression at the possible fourth week, the fourth appointment, we'd run the PHQ-9 again. And so when clients get below 9 on a PHQ-9, that's a really good place to be. And that's the point, actually, when they're into recovery. It's really very mild, but in the NHS, below 9 on a PHQ-9, we would actually discharge a client, you know.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this, we talk about the causes, and I never thought that I'd, you know, I don't know if the word succumb to depression is the right word, I don't know, but I never thought I'd suffer from it or have it. And then my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 4. And, you know, the NHS were fantastic. They got a great system for children with diabetes, really supportive. But I just wondered, with like that was the point to do like a little intervention with us as a family and as adults, because although my wife's also diabetic, so we had so much more information, and we knew so much more about it. So I consider myself lucky in if you can say that, in the fact that we knew about diabetes, and we were in a better position to deal with my son's diagnosis. But I just wondering whether, you know, that's the point where there could have been some kind of intervention saying, you know, this is a life-changing moment for you and your family, and this is what you should be looking out for. And I remember the anxiety, the dealing with the stress, the anxiety of looking after a young child with diabetes, etc. And that is like the turning point for me in my journey. That's what I believe led on to the anxiety and the depression. The other stuff, the PTSD and stuff like that, was caused more by experiences at work, but that on top of home life as well was probably the start of the journey into that world of depression.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's understandable, you know, because when you have a long-term condition, really, like diabetes, although it is very manageable, in the same way as depression is manageable, obviously, with different management strategies. But it is very worrying, isn't it? You know, and I think if someone, you know, not just yourself, but the family, it is a cause of concern, and it can kind of, in fact, I would say that, you know, within long-term conditions, for example, diabetes, then we do get quite a lot of people who come for treatment, actually, you know, both within the NHS and within the private sector. So, you know, to kind of look at how they can cope. So, because I'm not an expert in helping people managing diabetes or any other long-term condition, for example, multiple sclerosis, or there's one, you know, where people have affected lung capacity, I think COPD. It does help, you know, there are strategies to help people cope in terms of dealing with the depression if you have a long-term condition.
Yeah, it's just be interesting, wouldn't it? Sometimes I find our health services are very segmented, whereas like, okay, we're dealing with a child with diabetes, but let's just have an umbrella thought for the family and say that this might happen in the next 12 months. You need to be looking at your anxiety levels, your worry. Maybe this is some support groups, some free resources, just so you got the heads up, I suppose. It's just part of a bit of joined up thinking, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah, some signposting, and certainly, you know, I can't kind of in terms of, you know, your son, is he all right now, Bill?
Well, yeah, he lives with it, and obviously I know, like you just highlighted, people with chronic long-term conditions can also suffer with depression. So as he grows up, we're on the lookout to make sure that he remains happy and doesn't let the condition get on top of him. But again, it's just that awareness, isn't it?
It is, absolutely, yeah, definitely. And I think, continually checking in and making sure, that people are kind of coping. There's nothing wrong in that, is there? But I think as I go into what is available a little bit further on, I will touch upon some of those things, because there is an awful lot of assistance available, but like anything, it's on a need to know basis.
Yeah, that's it.
And you don't know what you don't know. So that's the thing. But I think, just to recap, there's no single cause. People sometimes will come with different reasons. For example, life events, bereavement, loss, health issues like we've spoken about, financial worries, retirement, that change to someone's life that transition can, going from work and having all the time in the world, can also trigger depression if it isn't actually managed correctly. And I think some people will be more vulnerable than others, depending on their previous history, depending on family life. If people were brought up in an environment perhaps which was quite negative, and also dependent on particular kind of personality makeup, if you like. But amidst it all, research does suggest that there is a big relationship with depression and the way we think about things and the way that we behave. And that kind of relationship between we think about things, ourselves, the world, the meaning we give to things that happen to us in our life, has a massive impact on how we kind of feel on a daily basis, and also how we kind of respond in terms of our behaviour. And I'll talk a little bit about that further on when I go into the treatments.
Okay.
Because CBT at the moment is the evidence-based treatment for depression, because it focuses really on the way that we think about things and also how that relates to the emotional state and the behaviours. So I will kind of go into that in a moment. Have you got any questions so far? Any kind of burning questions, what we've covered so far, Bill?
No, there is one from audience member. Just I think you might answer it in a bit, but it's about helping OCD as well. So
okay. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Is it okay if I just cover that off now before we go on to the strategies to manage depression? With OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, the treatment for OCD is a treatment called exposure and response prevention, ERP. And so the important thing is to really firstly get a proper assessment for OCD, because some people will say, oh, I've got OCD, but the reality is when you actually go through the screening for OCD, which is kind of presents itself, it might be a fear of contamination, it might be hand washing, it might be a fear of bringing harm, so it might manifest itself in locking doors, checking gas taps, just a kind of constant washing. So say, for example, what I noticed during COVID, when the pandemic was at its highest, people people's anxiety symptoms were exacerbated, and people were told, weren't they, to keep washing their hands, to keep using the gel. And unfortunately, you know, this kind of washing your hands just a few times turned into big problems for people, and then they developed OCD because this hand washing went from washing your hands a few times to actually 30 times in one go, and you know, people's hands were bleeding and it was becoming a big problem. So the important thing is for OCD is to get the correct screening, and you need to be able to get that, and I'll talk about where you can get that. And I'm also happy as well, you know, to send you the OCD screening questionnaire. Yeah. But I think, you know, that's something that I can kind of send through, Bill, and you've got people's email addresses. And as I go through to the end, you know, I am more than happy for people to email me. I've got my details at the end, and I'm happy to give more information and help in any way I can, really. So I hope that that's kind of covered a little bit about OCD. Obviously, we haven't got time to kind of go into screening you or a diagnosis, but I'm more than happy to offer a 30-minute kind of free consultation, and there's kind of no obligation in any way. I'll give you my details and I'll do a quick screening for you, and I'll tell you exactly what you can do in order to get the right help for your OCD if it is a OCD. Okay, I hope that's helped. So if we look at the strategies to manage depression, firstly, don't underestimate the power of talking. Very often, a problem shared is a problem solved. Unfortunately, people will very often suffer in silence, and that's the worst thing that you can do. You know, people will have thoughts about, I don't want to be a burden, I don't want to worry anyone, nobody's going to be able to help me, how can they solve my problems? They will feel helpless. But unfortunately, it's those people who don't talk, and men, of course, there is a high suicide rate in men. It is 4 times as much as women, and there is a biological reason for that, because having worked with men, some of who perhaps had a serious suicide attempt before coming to work with me, some of the thoughts that perhaps prevented them from talking were, you know, it's not manly, it's a sign of weakness. Dad used to say, man up, young boy, you know. And so all these messages and the biological wiring will impact, certainly for men, on not reaching out and talking when the pressure's building up, whether that's relationships, worry about work, worry about health, worry about finances, all these different things. So if there's one important message here, is do not suffer in silence, because people really would rather talk about your problems than actually hear about your death in the end. And unfortunately, sadly, there are so many people who will resort to suicide when, if they could have just reached out and stumped up the courage to feel it's okay to talk, could have been avoided. So, you know, if you're listening here today, you know, or if you're concerned about any family or friend, then just start talking. And obviously, some of the time, if it's difficult to kind of talk to those close to you, then speak to your GP, and he can point you in the right direction of what you need to do. But of course, there is a time that if you don't want to talk to a friend, colleague or family, and some people don't feel they have people to talk to, and sometimes these people in our lives can be kind of part of the problem, then it is really about getting some professional help. And I will tell you about how you can go forward and get that.
I suppose.
Any questions?
I was going to say, I suppose looking back on what happened with myself is, I could see it in myself. I could get quite grumpy with the kids and get quite angry and get into arguments with them. And it's like, why are you arguing with a 7-year-old sort of thing? You're not going to achieve anything. And I'd want to sort of go back and continue the argument and not be the adult or the parent and sort of walk away, although you know that you should do. And I remember Emma just sort of saying, you need to go and get some help. And I remember thinking to myself, I need to stop work. I need to take a break. And the day that I was actually thinking that, one of the worst things happened at work, unfortunately. I just remember it just all blew up in the end. I was just sitting at a coffee shop and just ended up crying. And Emma then went and put me back to bed. And that was kind of where the changes started to happen. You know, we started to get help and support. But I was talking to someone last night, and they were worried about talking about things because they were worried about breaking down in front of a group of people. And actually, I think sometimes you have to be vulnerable. You have to let that vulnerability out, because you'll actually, instead of holding it back, by actually letting it out and showing people that, you know, that you are going through a rubbish time, you'll actually learn more and move forward quicker. All the time that you're holding it back, you're hiding it or holding it back, you're not going to move forwards.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think there's always a point, a catalyst, if you like, the straw that broke the camel's back, and that melting point. And, you know, for you, it was breaking down and having that release of emotion. And it seems like that was the point at which you started to realize you did need to get some help, and you did need to kind of reach out and speak to someone.
Yeah, and interesting things happened, and things like we moved house, but we moved house thinking, you know, and I'm sure people do this, they do stuff like move house or do something completely different, thinking that will change things. But actually, after we moved house, I felt exactly the same. But it was just like a 6-9 month distraction because I was keeping busy. But actually, when you come back to it, it's just like, oh, I still feel as low as I was. So
definitely, yeah, totally, really good point, because I think sometimes you can search outside of yourself for external things in the hope that will kind of change how you're feeling and increase your happiness. But very often the secret to feeling good is inside of you. It's just the extent to which you are able to find that, and the skills and the tools and the strategies, and how that can help you develop more psychological resilience.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, talking, you can't underestimate, and it may be that if you've got financial burdens, or, you know, the relationship is not going well at the moment, that talking to a friend they may not be able to resolve those difficulties. You know, they might not have 10 grand or whatever to lend you, but the sheer fact that you've let someone in to that problem and reduce that isolation you are feeling will reduce the pressure valve, and that in itself can be very, very therapeutic. And seeing is believing. The other thing is, of course, there's a big therapeutic, there's an awful lot of serotonin in how we spend our time, who we spend it with. And you know, I say to my clients, because of course some of them, when they come to me and I kind of look at their life as well, because obviously perhaps someone has been made redundant, that might be a catalyst. So they've gone from working to becoming what we would say deactivated, so they're not doing a lot. And that kind of reason for getting up and out has gone, and so they've become deactivated. And it's really important, because the less you do, the less you want to do. And that, you know, with depression, when we kind of look at behaviors and how you spend your time, I kind of say to my clients, are you living an ACE life? And they're, well, what do you mean, are you living an ACE life? So the acronym ACE, for activity scheduling, in other words, planning your diary, your life, is those activities that stand for achievement, things like your chores, your work stuff, need to be kind of scheduled in. Then there needs to be activities that give you a sense of connection. Perhaps, you know, we're kind of having a chat now, we're talking about depression within the community and within, you know, a group. And also activities that give a sense of enjoyment, because very often when people become depressed, they will stop doing some of the things that once give them pleasure, that would give their mood a boost. And unfortunately, that's the worst thing they can do. So what I will very often do in a session, perhaps with a client who has become deactivated, is we will spend the time actually going through an ACE activity schedule. And whilst they might think nothing's going to make them feel any better, I say, okay, you don't need to believe it right now. You've been on the antidepressants a long time. They haven't helped you. Let's just do this for a week as an experiment, because at the moment you're finding it difficult to even get out of bed. And of course, in a climate of accountability where I'm being very structured and being quite directive, because this is a really big treatment intervention, activity scheduling over a course of a week. Sometimes they can't think of things and we have to be really inventful and come back. And when you kind of look at the mood, it's really improved. So very often people can be depressed if they're very busy, but if you look at their life in terms of their activity schedule or their diary, there's a really big imbalance. So that's why it's really important to have a work-life balance, that you get a mix of enjoyment, connection, and of course those activities that give you a sense of achievement. So did you want to ask any questions? Is there any questions coming in about anything so far, Bill?
No, it's all good at the moment. So ACT is sort of activity which is achievement, activity that's community based, and then activity that is enjoyable.
Absolutely. You need to be designing your diary, your daily plan, your weekly plan in a way where there is an equal division of time spent on those activities that give you a sense of achievement. So it may be that, you know, you're planning something in the business and that's work orientated, but if you could achieve that, it could give you a sense of achievement. So activities that give a sense of achievement would normally be work orientated tasks and chores. So of course there's going to be a certain amount of time in your week where you do those, but you also want to be doing activities which give you a sense of connection, and that might be getting out in the community, connecting with people, connecting as we're doing now, taking part in an activity that brings you more into contact with other people. Very often, of course, when people start to feel very depressed, it may be that they are withdrawing, they're isolating, and they're not connecting. So they've become quite alone. So hence, it's really important we are designed to crave human connection. So that's going to kind of be really, really important, to connect with other people and have activities in your life that you are doing that. And of course, one of the things that I do, I took up running because myself struggled with depression as a teenager, didn't know where to turn, tried everything, eventually through knocking on doors, not knowing where to turn, feeling quite suicidal, I have to say, I eventually arrived in a CBT therapist's office, because after 5 years of psychotherapy, which didn't particularly give me any strategies and tools, I eventually started to kind of develop more tools and strategies. And one of the things that I took up, which kind of helps me, and I do today, I've been this morning, is running. So I kind of connect. I'm in a running club. I do the park run in London where I live, usually on a Saturday. I'm in a bit of a running community, and of course that's kind of almost also an enjoyable activity. So it's really good that you have a good work-life balance, because that is a prescription that is, or replacement, if you like, for an antidepressant.
I think we just have a bit of honesty here as well, though, and people might be sort of going, "Yeah, I understand that, but I just can't get out of bed." I think there's some tough love in the fact that you have, and just as bad, you have to get going and have to do it. And once you've done it a few times, then it starts to get easier. The first time, second time, third, fourth, maybe the fifth, that maybe download the app Couch to 5K to give you a bit of motivation, but it is going to be hard to start, isn't it? Because you are of that low mood, you don't want to get out of bed, or you just want to sit on the sofa, but then a lot of people in our community have got animals as well, dogs to walk and stuff like that. So it doesn't have to be running, does it? It's just getting out.
Absolutely, 100%. And you're spot on, because obviously there are different levels of depression, to moderate, to moderately severe, to severe. And at worst, people who I've worked with are literally not even getting dressed of a day, let alone going out for a run. And so obviously the way that you would deal with perhaps that kind of situation, where your levels of activity and your level of functioning were really impacted, it then is really about actually learn to walk before you can run. And it is about the basic things. What can you do today? Can you, have a bath? Can you perhaps pop out, go down the road, get yourself that pint of milk? Can you put the kettle on? And it's kind of basic stuff like that. Smaller goals, realistic goals that eventually have a domino effect that will then lead people to be able to take on more activity. So I think you're absolutely right. And, it can be difficult to motivate yourself when you are depressed. I think having animals, can, if people have got animals, it does give them a reason, because obviously dogs need walking, need exercise, so it can give people a reason to get up and get out. And there's nothing like a really good walk in the park to actually get your dose of exercise, because of course physical activity can really help lift your mood, and studies show that actually it is effective as SSRIs, which is an antidepressant. There's an awful lot of serotonin, and it really can help your mood. So I think if someone does have a propensity to low mood, then it's really going to be important to get some kind of physical activity. It doesn't mean joining a gym. It can mean going for a power walk, but you should be getting some activity in, because easiest way to shift your emotional state. And depression's an emotional state is to shift your body. Our bodies are not designed for living sedentary lifestyles. And I saw something written actually on Amazon. I think somebody had written a book, Depression Doesn't Hit a Moving Target. And I suppose for me to kind of take up running, and I certainly couldn't run when I first started. I could barely kind of run for 3 minutes, let alone half an hour, but it was built up over time.
That's good. Depression doesn't hit a moving target. I like that.
I like that, yeah. And when I read that, because I think I had a little bit of an ankle accident earlier on, and the level of activity went down, and I noticed, you know, the impact to my mood and wanted to get back on track. And I was looking on Amazon one day and I saw this Depression Doesn't Hit a Moving Target. And it was like, I really need to get moving again. And it does the trick, you know, but as I say, you don't have to go running. It's not everyone's cup of tea. You can go dancing, you can go dog walking. If you haven't got a dog, you can offer to walk someone else's dog. If you know people with dogs, people with pets. And, you know, there's so many different exercises out there. And I think the important thing is that it's finding something that you really enjoy, because then it's not going to be a chore and then it becomes sustainable.
That's it. And I think following on from another talk we did, or I'd done a few weeks ago, I think we said it takes 66 days to break a habit. So if your habit is sitting down on the sofa in the evening, you got to do your new activity for a while to get that formed into a new habit.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it can, you're right. And in fact, you know, it can take up to 3 months, but I believe that in a sense, you know, which is why people will be depressed perhaps for different lengths of time. And I've worked with people who've depressed for decades, you know. Yeah. So I think that if you work with someone who can offer you accountability in the same way, you know, look, someone might hire a personal coach, they might hire a personal trainer because they want to get results in a quick amount of time, you know. And I think it kind of is the same thing, you know, if you have suffered with depression for a long time and you're struggling to develop the motivation to do these things because you know that they're good for you, you know they'll help, but you just can't be bothered, then it's a case of, you know, you may need to get a little bit of help, a little bit of accountability, a coach, a mentor, a therapist, whatever you wish to call it, just to kind of get you there on track, hold you accountable, and get things done.
Cool. Yeah, we in my business program we have a hashtag fitness wins, so we sort of put in our fitness wins as and when we do something.
Fantastic. It's motivational, isn't it?
Yeah, I've always found, like, putting wins and stuff into groups that I'm part of, I find I work towards making a win for that day, but also looking at other people's wins and stuff like that, it kind of motivates me to do stuff as well.
Totally, absolutely. It really does, doesn't it, when you're in that kind of group community environment. And if there's a bit of a competitive edge there, then good. Fantastic idea. And I suppose apart from, you know, physical activity, talking to people and making sure you're planning your life in a way that you do get a balance and you are looking after yourself, because some of dealing with depression is to do with lifestyle. Very often people get into unhelpful habits, same routines, work, home, TV, work, home, TV, bottle of wine, feet up, TV. And unfortunately, very often they're not too sure why they're feeling depressed. But it's just because that routine, that habit, that behavior is not giving them a mood booster. And very often it's time to start to sort of change things up. So finally, negative thoughts, and I just want to touch upon that, because if people are depressed, they're more inclined to have negative, gloomy thoughts. What's the point in going out today? What's the point in doing anything? Everything is useless. And of course, very often what will help doing those thoughts is changing up your routine. And you may need someone, a family friend, good helper to give you a little bit of a push in the right direction if you're struggling. But also the other thing that we look at is thoughts perhaps that are known to cause you to feel bad, and they need to be dealt with in a slightly different way than a behavioural intervention by incorporating activity. So I'm talking about if you're a person who has a self-critical negative thinking style, that you're really hard on yourself, that is going to make you feel really low and can very often cause people to feel depressed. I once worked with a client, Bill, who she'd had some critical parents, and I hate to say, but it appeared that one of the parents was a bit of a bully. And of course, she had environmentally then taken it on board to criticise herself, because there was a lot of criticism when she was young in the home. And that self-critical thinking style can also affect how you feel. So, if you are someone, and I'm not saying that you are, but if there's anyone listening and you do tend to come down quite hard on yourself, then start to become quite aware of that and challenge it, and start to treat yourself with a little bit more compassion in a way that you would someone that you really care about. I once worked with a lady who had a really high volume of self-critical thought. She was jumping from one depression. She had recurring episodes of depression. And so even just recognizing that when we worked together, it was like a light bulb moment. And by the second time that I saw her, she said that even realizing from our discussions and you pulling that out in the session has caused me to distance myself, and I'm not doing it as much. And now what that means is I'm feeling better because I'm not bullying myself all the time. I've toned that critical thinking self down. The other unhelpful thought is when you catastrophize. Now that's very closely linked with anxiety. When you have a catastrophic thinking style, you're thinking about negative things happening in the future. And so when you have that and it goes unmanaged and uninterrupted, you're going to feel anxious, but it can also affect your mood. Because if you think I can't control my anxiety, because you're constantly thinking about negative things going on, and what if this goes wrong, and what if I do that happens, and what if this goes wrong in the future, then that can affect your mood. There are in fact 12 unhelpful thinking styles, and when I go through some resources, which is coming soon, they will be included in those resources, because it's really important when you're looking at strategies to manage depression, bearing in mind that research says there's a close correlation with the way we think and how that impacts on our emotions and behaviours, that it's really important that you understand your thoughts and how they can also be causing unwanted negative emotions.
Yeah.
So any questions on that, Bill, or anyone else so far?
No, it brings me back to a chat I did on Monday where we were talking about affirmations and, just being kind to yourself, I suppose, and having those affirmations there to combat those negative thoughts.
Totally, absolutely. Positive affirmations, you know. So if you're someone who, if you make a mistake, for example, and you give yourself a hard time because you have a rule in your life that says you must never make a mistake, or that means that you failed, then it's time to kind of adjust that internal dialogue and replace that dialogue with something which is more affirming, more positive. You know, just because I've made a mistake, it doesn't mean I'm useless. It doesn't mean I failed. It means I'm actually human.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you have to develop a more compassionate, understanding relationship, which is based upon replacing those negative and helpful thoughts and ideas that very often are a result of your belief system, and you have to learn to replace those with some positive affirmations and learn to actually manage your mindset, because your mind can, you know, can work for you, or it can work against you.
Definitely.
Definitely. And so on that note, you know, in terms of some resources, the first, depression self-help, and I've included these because in the end, I would say these are some of the best resources. So if you are suffering with depression, anyone listening suffering with depression, or anyone you care about or are worried about, you know, there's a lot of self-help. It's Depression Self-Help PDF. It's the depression resource that we pull upon when we treat depression to help people recover. And everything I've talked into, the ACE activity scheduling, tackling your unhelpful thoughts, if you have any, with positive thoughts, there's a whole resource. And very many people will be able to work successfully just through self-help, just through reading information online. The Depression Self-Help PDF, it's a couple of pages. It's got your ACE activity schedule, and many people can work on their own, working through this stuff, and get some real help and support for depression and recover. But in other cases, it may be that if someone's depressed, that they would prefer to actually have someone to work with them to help them navigate their way through all the different treatment protocols. What I've included as well, Bill, and for all the listeners, is the same kind of PDF, but for stress, because stress fundamentally causes common mental health problems like depression. And some of the resources contained within the stress self-help, there will be some crossovers, but I have, you know, I've included that because I think that these are phenomenal resources that are used extensively within the NHS services and within my private independent practice, that have helped people who have been seriously depressed recover from depression. And some of them have kind of recovered within 6 weeks. Others, it might take 2 months, and then others, it might take up to 3 months. It depends on the individual, and it depends on the different problems that are causing the depression. And of course, the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, the BACP, is a website where you can find a therapist, a private therapist, and go and have a chat with someone if you don't want to talk to family and friends. Sometimes people will prefer talking to a non-family member, someone impartial. And then there's also the British Association for Cognitive Therapists. I'm a member of both of these accrediting bodies. It's a bit like if you're gas care. You know, if you're a gas engineer, you know, and you're Corgi registered, I think it's gas care registered. Yeah. It's a kind of quality stamp. So you do really need to be, if you are sourcing some professional help and looking for a counsellor or looking for actually a CBT therapist, I would definitely make sure that you have someone that is accredited. And of course, there are other organisations, Depression Alliance, Mental Health Matters, the Samaritans, and mine. These are all phenomenal organisations. They're free of charge. You can get free information. I haven't included the websites, but I certainly can do that and share in the Facebook group. But I'm just kind of leaving that there because this is your road into, you know, getting help for depression or anyone that you care about that might be suffering.
Yeah, I've just been dropping those links into the comments for people. So
fantastic, thank you, that's wonderful. So as I said, when to get professional help, if it's impacting on your functioning, you know, if your work is being impacted, if your business is starting to become affected, and you know these tasks on your list, you can't concentrate, you know, you're feeling like you can't be bothered, or if you're in a job and you're at the point where you're tearing your hair out and you know it's becoming very difficult to do your work and you're thinking about going to the GP, I'd say at that point when your functioning becomes impacted, it's time to get professional help, because the reality is depression is a problem that is very easily remedied. Okay, it's a problem. I absolutely love working depression because the results are so tangible. It's unbelievable. And people who have been on depression and tablets, your sertralines, your citalopram for absolute years, you know, come and have some professional help and they recover, perhaps when the antidepressants hadn't helped them. And of course, if you're experiencing suicidal thoughts, you really do need to get professional help, whether that is speak to your GP, speak to a professional, someone who is trained to help you work through those thoughts, someone who is trained to help you with your depression. And of course, at some point, it would be worth you all filling in a PHQ-9, because, you know, the reality is if you score above 10, that wouldn't mean you're seriously depressed. What it would mean is that you could do with a little bit of help to get you back on track, to help improve your mood. 14 and above is moderate depression. 19 and above, it's serious depression. So I will, I'll send through the PHQ-9 bill, and perhaps you could share that with the group as well.
Put it in the documents. I think also once you've got some professional help and you've got some tools in your armory, and you start to become more self-aware, don't you? So you can catch yourself before it have to get worse again.
Absolutely, totally. I think the early intervention, in terms of if you feel that, you know, you're struggling with your mood, you're not feeling as happy as you could be, you're not sure why, or maybe you are sure why, but, you know, you just don't know what to do about it. I think rather than let it kind of drag on, you know, the sooner that you perhaps have a chat to someone, then the sooner you're going to get back on the road to recovery and feeling your happy self again.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent.
So, okay, so what help is available? Well, aside from the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapists, and I've given you some websites, and having a BABCP accredited CBT therapist, this is really important, okay? CBT is the evidence-based treatment for depression and anxiety conditions like OCD, hypochondria, specific fears and phobias. And the reason it is, it's undergone extensive research, and it works on the way that you think about things, because if you're someone who is prone to anxiety, it will mean that you have a particular thinking style that is causing that anxiety. And so it's important to look at those thoughts, find a way to manage them. If you're a worrier, you're constant worrying about what's happening tomorrow, not living in the here and now, you're going to be anxious. So you need to have a strategy to deal with that worry, and you need to be in a position where you can learn skills to create worry-free time in your life, to create worry-free zones in your diary. And in the same way that if you're depressed and you have a particular thinking style that kind of is making your mood low, CBT is the evidence-based treatment for that, and it is delivered throughout the NHS in England and Wales for that reason, because any treatments that are delivered in the UK are delivered according with extensive research. So CBT is the treatment really for depression. Counselling, there is a place for counselling and psychotherapy. Having been a counsellor for 20 years before I trained as a CBT therapist, I know the strengths and perhaps the weaknesses. You know, it can provide a place for someone to talk and to be listened to, and that can be therapeutic. And if someone has had a bereavement, it can be perhaps more appropriate to go and talk to a counsellor. However, if someone is struggling with severe anxiety, severe depression, it may be that all the talking in the world is not going to help them with that. And there are specific structured strategies which the CBT model of psychotherapy has. It's in the training, which has been shown to be effective for depression and anxiety. So I think that's really important, because when you're looking for help, it's not knowing what the right help is, what the appropriate treatment. So that's my biggest advice. Go to your GP. If you're feeling below par, he can do a referral to your NHS IAP service. That's increasing access to psychological therapy. You can see a counsellor through your IAP service. You know, if you want, and it is about patient choice, it is about client choice, but the more effective treatment, and you may be steered if you're suffering with anxiety and depression, and it's clear that that's a result of perhaps behavioural things that could be improved upon, the way that perhaps you might be thinking, that CBT is the one. There is a place for antidepressants. However, in my experience, people will very often reach for antidepressants in the hope it provides a magical cure. It can take the edge off some symptoms. It works on the central nervous system. Some of them might have a slight sedative in them, which will help you sleep at night, mirtazapine. But the reality is there's nothing like having some CBT or some self-help CBT. I've included some of that to help you look at lifestyle changes, perhaps, that might be healthier, that might help your mood, and also how you can take control of your mindset. That, in my sort of 25, 30 years experience of working with thousands of people with depression has been far more effective than any antidepressants. And of course, you can do a self-referral. You don't need to go to your GP. You may not want to go to your GP. So if you know where your nearest service is, IAP service, you can Google it. Then you can pick up the phone and you can say, I'd like some help. I'm feeling low, or I'm feeling anxious. I'm struggling at the moment. I'd like to refer myself. You'll have a telephone assessment, and then they'll invite you in for some treatment, and it's very, very effective. And then, of course, employee assisted programs are another place that you can go for help, because some people, under their company healthcare scheme, they may have access to a counsellor. Employee assisted programs may offer CBT. So it's worth looking, if you're employed with a company, to see whether you have, because you've got pretty immediate access there. And of course, the other thing to consider, if you have private health care insurance and you don't want to be going through, on waiting lists potentially in the NHS, then, because IAP services, which are the psychology services which deliver treatments for common mental health problems, invariably have long waiting lists. Then if you have private healthcare with AXA, Bupa, you can call them up and say, I'd like to claim on my policy, please. I'd like to get some help for anxiety, or I'd like to get some help for depression. So there's lots of different options, and I think the other option is really, in the end, if you want a free chat, I'm here. There's no obligation. I can point you in the right direction if you want some advice on what next steps you should be taking for OCD, or if it's to do with someone you're concerned about, or you're concerned about PTSD or any other problem, really, not just depression. These are problems that I can listen to, see what I believe could be maintaining the problem within a 30-minute telephone call, and then give you some advice. And that in itself could be enough to get you back on the right track. And those are my details on the screen. But apart from that, we've been running a bit longer than I had imagined. It's been great, and you've been a fantastic interactive person in the group. But I think what I'm going to do now is see if I can just turn down the presentation and just see you and just have a final mop up and see if there's any questions.
Yeah,
okay.
Stop. I'll help you with that.
Brilliant! I can see you again.
I've just put your Calendly link into there, and it's Liz George Wellbeing. What's the end of your website?
Let me just bring that up again. Can you see it?
No.
Okay, so
it's Liz George Wellbeing Centre.
.co.uk.
I'll put that into the chat as well. So
brilliant.
People can have a 30-minute sort of diagnostic call, I suppose. 30-minute chat with you to see.
Yeah, or a well-being call. Mm-hmm. A well-being call. If people are, just want to have a chat about some things, might be wanting to look at some strategies that are bespoke to them, that might help with their mood, help improve their mental health and well-being, because let's face it, you don't need to be depressed to just want some strategies to improve your mental health and well-being. We've been talking extensively about depression, but very often you can not be depressed, but just looking for some strategies so to improve your mental health and well-being. So yeah, people can most definitely, I will happily have a chat to anyone who wants to give me a call or set up a 30-minute consultation by telephone or Zoom, and give them some help and strategies or point them in the right direction.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming along, and it's been great that our paths crossed. It's perfect timing, wasn't it? And
it was perfect timing. Yes, perfect timing. It was really good to meet you there, Bill. And I'm pleased that things are feeling more, much better for you. Do you know what I mean? You really look happy in yourself.
Yeah, I'm busy. I'm enjoying it. I love doing stuff like this, and I think it's really important that we get things like this out in the open and get people talking about it, isn't it? So.
Absolutely. So I think, we kind of covered off quite a few questions, didn't we, as we've gone through today. I'm sorry about the glitch with the PowerPoint.
That's right.
Best laid plans. I had it all, as I said, sorted, but it kind of, in the end, the route that wasn't ideal, but the best laid plans, as they say.
So it's technology.
So just finally, have you got anything, or anything you wanted to say about that? Any final questions or any questions from the audience?
No, I think everyone's busy working, so a lot of people will be able to catch up with this on YouTube or in the Facebook group, so they can catch up and watch this over again. And your details are all there if they want to contact you.
Oh, fantastic. It's really good to catch up, and hope to bump into you soon again.
Yes, we'll be in touch. Take care.
Thanks. All right. Take good care, Bill.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.